I've been hearing people say that in the Old Testament, people were saved because of their obedience to the law, meaning the law of Moses, or what we normally refer to as the 613 commandments in the books or in the Torah. In the New Testament, and they say that in the New Testament, we are saved by grace through faith. And I'm here to tell you that in both testaments, that we are all saved by grace through faith. Okay? The reason why I say this is because I believe that God doesn't change. He doesn't change his character. Okay? And how he works is based on his character. So today I want to share with you what I learned while I was studying 1 Samuel 21 and Matthew chapter 12. And I'm going to start with Matthew chapter 12 and then connect the scripture references to 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now it says here, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on a Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pick heads of wheat and eat them. But when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is against the law to do on the Sabbath." The Pharisees were the religious leaders. Okay, so they immediately cried foul because they think that they were breaking the Sabbath laws because they weren't supposed to work. But if you understand what's going on here, they weren't actually working. They were just simply picking up some food, okay, some wheat in order to eat. Okay, but look at how Jesus responds to them. Okay, he doesn't respond to them by defending, by telling the Pharisees, no, they weren't working. They were just simply picking up food to eat. Instead, look at what Jesus said. He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry, how he entered the house of God and ate the sacred bread, which was against the law for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests? Or have you not heard in the law that the priests in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are not guilty?" Now, I'm going to jump to verse 5 first. This is because this is actually easier to understand because priests work during Sabbaths. They usually have this kind of discussion, you know, during Sabbaths. Now, going back to verse 4, this is actually referring to 1 Samuel chapter 21. So let me just read to you what's going on here in 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1 to 6. David went to Ahimelech the priest in Nob. Ahimelech was shaking with fear when he met David and said to him, "Why are you here by yourself and no one accompanying you?" David replied to Ahimelech, "The king instructed me to do something, but he said to me, 'Don't let anyone know the reason I am sending you or the instructions I have given you.'" Okay, so let me just jump a little bit. So this is actually what David was looking for. He told Ahimelech, "I have give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found." Okay, so he was actually looking for food because he was hungry. Then the priest replied to David, "I don't have any ordinary bread at my disposal, only holy bread." Holy bread is actually the bread that is presented inside the tabernacle or inside the holy place, inside the tabernacle. Okay? This is actually the showbread. Okay? So this was actually meant to be eaten by the priests only and not for any ordinary person. But look at what Ahimelech told David. Okay? Only holy bread is available, and then only if your soldiers have abstained from relations with women. So David said to the priest, "Certainly women have been kept away from us, just as on the previous occasions that I have set out." Okay, to cut the long story short, the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there other than the bread of presence. Okay, so just a couple of things that we need to understand before we, continue on. First of all, Nob was not the official religious center at that time. Or, I mean, that wasn't the original religious center. The original place was Shiloh, which was already abandoned because in 1 Samuel chapter 4, they lost the ark to the Philistines. The ark is also not there in Nob. Okay, the ark is actually in Kiriath Yarim, which you can find a reference in 1 Samuel chapter 6 and 2 chapter 7. Now, the question is, where did Ahimelech get the guidelines, to tell David that it was okay for him to eat this showbread, provided that he is ceremonially unclean or that he didn't touch any women? Okay. The answer to that is no. He didn't get this in the Torah. He didn't get this anywhere in the law of Moses because there was no such reference. There was no provision for this kind of thing. Okay. So what he did was actually improvise. Okay. All these conditions were actually improvisations by the priests. Even Ahimelech was technically not a priest anymore. Because if you read 1 Samuel chapter 2, 28 to 33 and 1 Samuel chapter 3, 13, you will learn that his family was already rejected by Yahweh. God removed the anointing from their family. Okay? Technically speaking, everything that is going on here fails to meet the requirements of the law of Moses. Okay? What David and his men did was actually against the law. Even the recommendation of the priests was against the law. Okay? But Jesus, should I say, not only approved of what Ahimelech did, this unofficial priest, okay, he approved of it because he was looking out for the welfare of David and his men. His men were hungry. If he did not give them this showbread, they're going to die of hunger. And that is more important than observing the law. Okay? The law was not meant to be implemented stubbornly. Okay? The saving of the people's lives were more important. Notice as well that Jesus called Nob, despite lacking the ark and the tabernacle, he called the place house of God. Technically speaking, it's not. It's not the official house of God. Okay? Because you don't have the ark. And definitely you don't have the tabernacle there. Okay? Clearly, we know that they were not able to perform the requirements of the law of Moses to the T. If God was going to be technical about it, all their sacrifices means nothing. But Jesus still regarded it as the house of God, despite the failure to meet all these requirements stated in the law of Moses. You're going to notice this as well when you read through the Bible. There are many times that people, even kings, they break the laws, but they are not killed immediately. And what I mean to say is that they're not judged immediately. Take, for example, David when he committed adultery with Bathsheba and killed his husband Uriah, or Solomon with his many wives. Obviously, this was prohibited in the Torah. If you are going to be really serious about carrying out the law, everyone will die. I'm not saying that God is okay with sins. I'm not saying that God is approving of what they're doing. Clearly, He's not. Now, I told you a while ago that the ark was not present. But this is also true even during the time of Jesus. There was no ark in the temple. Okay, if you're going to be strict about it, it was they don't meet the requirements because the ark needed to be inside the holy of holies, inside the temple. Okay, it represented the presence of God. Okay, but look at what Jesus called this arkless temple. He calls it my Father's house in John chapter 2 verse 16. This means he honored it. He honored it because of the sincerity. Okay, because this was the worship place. Okay, he wasn't crying technical foul when people went to the temple to sincerely worship. Okay, so why should the Pharisees cry foul when Jesus didn't? Okay, going back to adultery, going back to divorce. Now, when Matthew chapter 19, look at what Jesus said about adultery. Why did Moses then command a writing of divorcement and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives. It means to say that because of your stubbornness, that he allowed this, he suffered this. Okay, but from the beginning it wasn't so. Okay, and I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Jesus was telling them it was because of their stubbornness. But if they would only go to the essence of the law, they would all be committing adultery if they divorced their wives, unless it was because of marital infidelity. Okay, this doesn't mean, okay, that divorce is the end all be all, okay, to marital infidelity. This is not the all-in-one solution. What, okay, you can read about that in Hosea. Okay, see, God gives them, the point is that God gives them allowances to accommodate spiritual growth. They were not yet there in terms of their spiritual maturity. Okay, they don't understand the essence of marriage yet. Just think about the time when you were saved. You were burning bridges left and right. You think you are the moral high ground and everyone should automatically accept what you believe in. Now, I'm not saying this to endorse other religions, because I don't. I sincerely pray that everyone would come to know Christ, the living God. Even today, we are still sinning, even after we totally accept Christ. Because in terms of preaching the gospel, let me just ask you this question. How many of you so-called, or how many of us so-called believers are preaching the gospel religiously? Let me ask you this question. Did God forfeit your salvation just because you got scared of being rejected, of preaching, the gospel to the person next to you? Of course not. He understood that spiritual maturity takes time. Okay, and this doesn't mean that you should use this as an excuse not to preach the gospel. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. God's laws were not meant to be ungracious. It was there to show that nobody, and absolutely nobody, Jews or Gentiles, are able to perform it. Okay? And that the only reason why God did not judge people for not performing the law, it's because he is gracious. Okay? Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying God is okay with their failures to observe the law. Obviously, he was not, because they were exiled from the land. He knew that they would fail, but he gave them allowances for their failures. He gave them time. He disciplined them so that they will grow spiritually, so that they will mature. Look at what Paul said about the law. It was added because of transgressions. Okay? What that means, it was given in order to prevent them from sinning. It was to help curb sin so that it won't, become unbearable. Okay? Paul also talked about that the sin was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. Okay? But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. It was a guide pointing us to the real one who can save us. And Christ can only be accepted by faith. Okay, his righteousness cannot be earned. The standard of righteousness of God cannot be earned. It can only be accepted by faith, by our allegiance, by our believing loyalty. The law's purpose was to help them stay within the community of God. It was not necessarily the heart of God. It was to prevent them from straying away and imitate the nations around them. It was not a way for them to be saved. It was God's house rules. They were already in God's household. It was there to keep them from being snatched away by the idolatrous nations around them. This is the reason why I say, just like we are in the New Testament, they are also saved by grace through faith. Okay? God wasn't expecting that they would be able to perform the law perfectly. No one was getting saved because of the law. They were being condemned actually by the law. But if you are going to base it on the performance of the law, they will all be dead. If you don't believe me, read Hebrews 11. All the people mentioned were called faithful. All of them are Old Testament saints. Even Abraham was saved because of his faith and not because of his works. Check out James. Check out Galatians, Romans. Okay, let me just continue. Let me just go back to Matthew chapter 12. Okay, let's continue in verse 6. He says here, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I want mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of Sabbath. What Jesus was saying here, I believe, he was referring to himself. The one who is greater than the temple is here. He was the reason why they have the law, why they have the temple in the first place. If he was okay with it, why would it not be okay with them? See, God is not looking for technical perfection. As far as God's concerned, he is and he is still looking, okay, he was and he is still looking at our hearts, at their hearts. David and his men and the disciples, although they were eating in an unlawful way, they were not thinking of rebelling against God or committing apostasy. Okay, as far as Jesus is concerned, the Pharisees need to go beyond the letter of the law and into the essence of the law. And the essence of the law is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbors as yourselves. And this applies to all people. Okay, doesn't matter if it's Old Testament or New Testament. We all operate under the grace of God. God bless.